Good evening, and welcome to our show, featuring documentaries unlocking the realities behind myths. I'm your host, Ergün Kırlıkovalı, and I will be with you every Sunday at 6 p.m. Standard Time, Eastern Standard Time. You're welcome to send me your feedback at #ethocide. Thank you. Merriam-Webster defines myths as follows: a usually traditional story of historical events that serves to unfold part of the worldview of a people. Some of the adjectives associated with the word myth are fake, fiction, fantasy, hoax, fairy tale, false, legend, urban legend, and others. Even our history books in America are not free from myths. This book, for example, Lies My Teacher Told Me, written by James Loewen, lists about a dozen of them, including the hero making of Christopher Columbus, the truth about the first Thanksgiving, the invisibility of racism in history books, among others. In due time, we'll touch upon all of these points. But right now, let's focus on one myth, a long discredited political claim of genocide that creates, as a byproduct, a horrendous punishment for innocent people everywhere, namely terrorism. And the very real Armenian terrorism. Killing of innocent people around the world is justified by the myth of the alleged Armenian genocide. There are some excellent books, scholarly, proving that Armenian claim is nothing more than a myth, an urban legend, and here are just a few. I have with me all of these books, and in due time, we'll be able to cover sections from each of them. Each of these books specializes on certain aspects of the 1915 events. There are, I won't mention the names in big long list, but you see them here in the screen. All of these and more are available for discussion in this program. There will be guests invited on various subjects also in coming weeks. There are literally hundreds of books on this subject. I just want you to know that these facts and figures are scholarly, assembled after painstaking research over many, many years, decades. Discussing these books are beyond the scope of this program, but I will give you some basic reference points as to why the Armenian genocide allegations cannot be supported by history. Here's a statement by 69 prominent historians and experts on the subject that was published in the New York Times and Washington Post on May 19, 1985. The American academicians who specialize in Turkish, Ottoman, and Middle Eastern studies were concerned that the language embodied in the House Joint Resolution 192 in 1985 was misleading and inaccurate in several respects. Their reservations focused on the words Turkey and genocide. It is wrong to equate the Ottoman Empire with the Republic of Turkey in the same way that it is wrong to equate the Habsburg Empire with the current Republic of Austria. The Ottoman Empire, which was brought to an end in 1922, by the successful conclusion of the Turkish Revolution, which established the present-day Turkish Republic in 1923. Incorporated lands, which house more than 25 countries today. So they say Ottoman Empire and Turkey are two different things. They should not be treated the same, although Turkey certainly followed the Ottoman Empire. The Republic of Turkey bears no responsibility for any events which occurred during World War I. And the other aspect that they rejected was, this is how they put it: as for the charge of genocide, no signatory of the statement wishes to minimize the scope of Armenian suffering. We are likewise cognizant that it cannot be viewed as separate from the suffering experienced by the Muslim inhabitants of the region. The weight of evidence so far uncovered points in the direction of serious intercommunal warfare perpetrated by Muslim and Christian irregular forces, complicated by disease, famine, and suffering, and massacres in Anatolia and in adjoining areas during the First World War. The resulting death toll among the Muslims and Christian communities of the region was immense. But much more remains to be discovered before historians will be able to sort out precisely the responsibility between warring and innocent, and to identify the causes for the events which resulted in the death and removal of large numbers of Eastern Anatolian population, Christian and Muslim alike. Emphasis, Christian and Muslim alike. Statesmen and politicians make history, and scholars write it. For this process to work, scholars must be given access to the written records of the statesmen and politicians of the past. To date, the archives in the Soviet Union, remember this is 1985, Syria, Bulgaria, and Turkey all remain for the most part closed to dispassionate historians. Until they become available, the history of the Ottoman Empire in the period cannot be adequately known. We believe that the proper position for the United States Congress to take on this and related issues is to encourage full and open access to all historical archives, and not to make charges on historical events before they are fully understood. The history of the Ottoman Armenians is much debated among scholars, many of whom do not agree with the historical assumptions embodied in the wording of the House Joint Resolution 192. By passing the resolution, Congress will be attempting to determine by legislation which side of a historical question is correct. Such a resolution, based on historically questionable assumptions, can only damage the cause of honest historical inquiry and damage the credibility of the American legislative process. The history of the Ottoman Armenians is much debated among scholars. Overconfident to substantiate their genocide claims through historical evidence, Armenians took their case to the highest court in Europe. ECHR stands for the European Court of Human Rights. ECHR devastated the Armenian narrative with its 2015 verdict. Armenian claim of genocide is and remains an opinion, not a court verdict. Opinions can be rejected, and doing so is an act of freedom of speech, which cannot be curtailed in democracies. Finally, perhaps most importantly, ECHR ruled further that the alleged Armenian genocide could not be compared to the Jewish Holocaust because the latter had a verdict by a competent court after due process, while Armenian claim was never scrutinized by a competent tribunal. So it is now clear to all honest truth seekers that while Holocaust had its rock-solid Nuremberg verdict supporting it, the alleged Armenian genocides in Nuremberg did not exist. Unable to substantiate their claim of genocide by historical evidence and rejected by the courts, Armenians switched from history and law to politics, public relations, and propaganda, creating a new myth. That myth, surrounding a bogus genocide claim and reinforced with hearsay, forgeries, fabrications, omissions, lies, and never-ending repetitions, now fuels Armenian terrorism. Let's take a closer look at Armenian terrorism now. Most Americans learned about Armenian terrorism for the first time on January 27, 1973. This 78-year-old Armenian man, Gurgen Yanıkyan, lured two Turkish diplomats, the Turkish Consul General Mehmet Baydar, 47 years old, and Vice Consul Bahadır Demir, 30 years old, to a cottage at Biltmore Hotel in Santa Barbara, where he shot them in cold blood. During his trials, he pleaded not guilty because what he did was destroy two evils, as the victims were not human for him. He was sentenced to life in prison. He died at the age of 88, and his remains were moved to a military pantheon in Armenia, reserved for those who sacrificed their lives for the independence and freedom of Armenia. Thus, a bloodthirsty terrorist was given a hero's welcome posthumously. A detailed account of these hate crimes can be found in this book by Haluk Şahin. It is believed that Yanıkyan's hate crimes set off the string of assassinations of Turkish diplomats by ASALA and JCAG in the 1970s and 1980s. Yanıkyan would later be appropriated by ASALA as an iconic figure. Now let's take a look at the origins of Armenian terrorism. Let me get this second. I have another presentation here. It's part 2 of this presentation. There, I will be focusing on why do Armenians resort to terrorism? Why? What are the reasons? And how do we classify these various waves of terrorism. The first wave, it is believed that Yanıtyan's hate crime set off a string of assassinations of Turkish diplomats, many bombings, assassinations, and other acts of terrorism took place between 1973 and 1986. One of the most tragic ones happened on American soil, right here, on January 28, 1982. Two Armenians from Lebanon, both members of the JCAG, ambushed Turkish Consul General to Los Angeles, Kemal Arıkan. And shot him at close range as the Turkish diplomat was waiting in his vehicle at a traffic light in Westwood, California. The JCAG telephoned the United International Press in Los Angeles shortly after the murder, claiming responsibility. JCAG is generally thought to be the military branch of the ARF, which stands for Armenian Revolutionary Federation. All Turkish diplomats fallen during the service to their country to terrorists and bullets are solemnly and respectfully remembered each year on January 28th. FBI has a considerable file on Armenian terrorists. How serious is the Armenian terrorism in North America, meaning the United States and Canada? Very serious. There are many Americans and Canadian Armenians, American and Canadian Armenians, that have been convicted of terrorist crimes, and most of them were members of JCAG. According to FBI and Royal Canadian Mounted Police reports, here are some of them. Now, due to shortage of time, I'm not going to read all of these names to you, but you can see it's a big, long list. This is the American list, and this one is a list of Armenian terrorists in Canada. It's only a segment of the true volume of Armenian terrorism there. All of these acts of terror are considered by experts to be yet another phase of Armenian terrorism, the third wave to be exact. Armenian terrorism has a long history. According to Nalbandian, an Armenian historian, it started in 1862. Yes, many, many decades before 1915. Many Armenian terror groups were established between 1862 and 1922. Just look at this list. And that's a partial list. They called themselves revolutionary. I'm sure most experts and others on the subject would agree that the first wave of Armenian terrorism would be between 1862 and 1919. The second wave would be 1920 to 1922, as glorified by an Armenian writer in this book. It's called Operation Nemesis. The mission of Nemesis was to seek revenge for massacres of Armenians committed by some Ottoman forces and others, ignoring the fact that most of those killings, though sad and unacceptable, were actually carried out by irregulars in retaliation for the Armenian cruelty and massacres in Turkish and Kurdish villages in eastern Anatolia during World War I. 1973 to 1986 would be the third wave of Armenian terrorism, mostly unleashed by JCAG and ASALA and their offshoots. The fourth wave is from 1986 onwards. We are living through it as we speak. An added dimension to Armenian terrorism must be a cause for concern to all peace-loving people. Since 1990s, Armenian youth in American colleges and universities have become more aggressive. Even cultural nights organized by Turkish student associations are raided violently, causing campus police to cancel the event. What is even more ominous is that most Armenian American professors and their non-Armenian colleagues who support the Armenian cause have become more antagonistic, belligerent, and destructive to Turkish academicians. For example, even Atatürk lectures at California colleges, which would have nothing to do with 1915 events, were disrupted by screaming and violent Armenian youth, arrogantly trampling upon the freedom of speech of other scholars and students. One professor was mercilessly attacked in the press because he advised the Turkish ambassador on responding to questions about the Ottoman Armenians. It was worth noting that no one questioned the correctness of the American Armenian scholar who became the chief advisor of the president of the Armenian Republic, or doubted the veracity of the American Armenian professor whose son became the Armenian foreign minister. Talk about hypocrisy. No one questioned the objectivity of these scholars, Armenian scholars, or attacked them, nor should they. The only proper question is, what is the truth? It seems like Armenian terrorism did not end. It just changed its form, morphing into academic terrorism. This unacceptable behavior shows its face in the media and politics as well. But that is another discussion for another time. Thank you for joining me. See you next week.